what was done on this, I mean, it's pretty remarkable because there is camera shake and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's handheld, which is just... So some of the theories that it was on a tripod and then, like, shaken around in post to look like maybe it was handheld or something like that.
Okay.
Which is a possibility at least. So they're just like, well, let's approach it like we're trying to find this John Wabe. Let's like just call around some local TV studios to see if there's a John Wabe that works in Southern England in this field. So they call like the first local TV studio, and they just say, "Hi, I'd like to speak with John Wabe, please." And they're like, "Oh, John's not here today." Like the person immediately like, "John's not here today. He doesn't work here. He does come here to use our facilities for editing on occasion, but he works at another production studio, which was called like First. I don't know if it was First Cut Studio or something like that, but I think they're like, he works at First Cut Studio." So they go to First Cut Studio and they go in and again, long story short, they basically find out there's a guy named John Wabe who works at this editing studio, this production house. And it's John Whaley. And they catch him. Not only do they recognize him, they see there's pictures of the guy hanging on almost like an Employee of the Month type photo hanging in the hallway or something. But like they had footage for some reason, like when they met him at the bar like the year before as John Whaley, somehow they had a picture of his car, or they took a picture of his car and they had the car and the license plate. And then when they basically confronted this guy at the studio, he ran out of the building into his car and drove off, and they had a camera, and it was the same car and the same license plate. So without getting into it too much further, this thing really does... This groundbreaking footage appears to be a hoax by John Wabe, but the reasons behind it why, as they unravel the mystery a little bit more, I'll just wrap it up by saying it's a lot almost kind of like the Doug and Dave thing, where... The goal was just to get seriologists to say, look at this amazingly real footage we have. And then for someone, that's what the guy was almost like waiting on. Because he was so mad that they weren't doing anything with the footage, not because he was just waiting to get his royalties. He was so mad that they weren't doing anything with the footage because he was waiting for them to do something with it so that he could basically almost like come out and be like, these guys are idiots. I made this. Here's my proof. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the Oliver's Castle story.
Interesting.
I'm sure that was pretty enlightening. And probably a disappointment.
I've come to expect that after watching enough Chad Kalick films, that there's going to be some sort of disturbing background.
Yes.
I'm just so disappointed. I mean, it looks so real.
Yeah.
I still would like to know how he did that back then. I mean, what year was that he would have made that? 96?
I have the URL of the story on a piece of paper. It doesn't help me. I think 96. I think it was like August. August 11th, 1996. The weekend of August 11th and 12th, 1996, I think. It was like a Saturday, Sunday. Yeah, I mean, this is predating digital. So the theory is that like he perhaps did shoot it from a tripod. And then maybe maybe projected the image on like a screen and then like put some balls of light moving around.
Okay.
Got that over top of the footage because you couldn't digitally insert balls of light over because that didn't exist. And then maybe once that was overlaid, then like recorded again, maybe with make it look handheld is the theory. There's some instances where that theory falls apart, which just complicates the mystery even further. It's not important to get into. I still think it's a hoax, despite of whether or not how it was made. So, any other questions or thoughts on the Oliver's Castle disappointment before we move on? But it's an important story. It's a big it's another Gettysburg moment in the history of crop circles. So, real quick, we're going to talk about we're moving along pretty good. We're going to talk about the geometry. We're going to talk about sacred art. Then we'll get into the science. We'll wrap up with the big Chilbolton discovery, crop circle, and then we'll talk about we'll wrap things up after that. Moving along real quick to the geometry, just a couple of notes I have here. Of course, these things are meant to be seen from the sky. Some of the math can only be figured out by mathematicians, which is really interesting. That there's some of these crop geometric formations where like only mathematicians can actually figure these out and decipher them. That these things, some people are actually starting to think that these things are not like just two-dimensional, that they're actually remnants of something that would be 3-dimensional, or then there's a guy that talks about them being like 4 or 5 dimensions, and what we're seeing, we're only able to see the 2-dimension version of what's going on. And my analogy to kind of explain that would be like the allegory of the caves, where what we're seeing are like, you have the people in the cave that are seeing shadows on a wall. They're seeing a 2D picture in front of them. Right. But the reality is that it's actually a 3-dimensional thing, because behind them is people walking behind them with like statues with a fire that's casting a shadow on the wall. So the real event is a 3-dimensional event, but what they're seeing is only the 2-dimension shadow of it. So there's people that think that that maybe that's what's going on. And I'll actually be honest. The day that I decided I wanted to do the Crop Circle podcast, I don't know if either of you saw it, but it was a couple months ago. There was this video on Facebook, and it's been on Facebook for the past couple months, but it's a video floating around on Facebook that shows crop circles. That they're saying, did you know crop circles are actually 3-dimensional designs? And it shows like, it takes formations, and then it has computer animation that shows how they're actually like 3-dimensional designs, in like the full version. If you took this circle and actually turned it into a 3D shape, what it would look like.
Oh yeah.
I'll have to when we're done, I'll see if I can find that real quick. But that was kind of like the point where I was like, it's time to do a podcast. And let's see here. In 1997, Michael Glickman, who is kind of I guess I wouldn't call him a seriologist, because I think the seriologists are specifically the people that get in the field, okay, versus the people that maybe analyze these on computers.
He's a poser.
Wannabe. But Michael Glickman noticed a formation that essentially solved pi. Okay, so it was a formation with 4 satellite circles around a main circle, and he realized that what it was essentially doing is it was squaring a circle, and no one had ever come up with like this concept before, but it was basically a geographical way to just like solve pi. Now, I can't explain it better than that.
I came up with that concept sophomore year in geometry. And my geometry teacher said, I'll see you next year. Because I tried to apply pi to a square.
Oh, yeah?
It didn't work.
Did you make this formation?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
All right, so I have an audio clip here. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and listen to it. This one is a minute. I'm going to start saying how long a clip is, because I started to realize that when I play a clip, you guys don't know how long it's going on. So this one's a minute and 13 seconds. So let me pull up this clip here and play it for us about geometry.
These numbers correlate to letters spelling out a name. That name is Goddess of all creation.
To me, even now, after having lived with this diagram for 2 years, my hair stands on end. I've got goosebumps, because, you as a designer, if someone came to me and said, look, I want you to design a picture which has got 792 elements somehow and 504 elements, see if you can come up with something interesting. To come up with that, a perfect rotating DNA spiral, encoding those numbers, is in itself a work of genius. But then to find that in a wheat field in August, there, beautifully formed, and it seems to me the most sane way of dealing with this is to accept that this is a demonstration of a level of intelligence and compassion towards us, which is pulling us up. We have to look at the square in the face, and I think it's a truly extraordinary bit of intelligence and geometry.
So that was Michael Glickman talking about a particular formation. I think it was called in 2002 Crooked Soli, but it was a geometric shape that represented the DNA strand. An absolutely beautiful formation, and even he said in it, he's like, if someone had approached me and said, I want you to create a geometric shape that represents the DNA strand, he's like, I don't know if I would have ever come up with something as amazing as this. Anyways, very interesting when you think about the geometry, just how geometrically beautiful and sometimes brilliant these designs are, which, again, begins to unravel the Doug and Dave thing to an extent when you think about, no one ever said that Doug and Dave were mathematicians, but now that kind of moves us into the sacred art. I found this topic pretty interesting when that same guy that we just heard talked about these as sacred art. So I have 2 audio clips. I'm going to play them both, and then I'm going to let Matt talk and kind of weigh in and see what he'd like to add to these. The first one is 44 seconds. The next one, so 44 seconds, and then the second one, I'm going to play them back to back, is 3 minutes. So we have about 3 minutes and 44 seconds here of audio. Here's the first one.
I think the one thing that people misunderstand about art is that the viewer is part of the art.
Right.
The art, without the viewer, does it even exist?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't exist unless it's viewed. That is what the art is about. It's in the moving through time and space, the evolution and the unfolding of the experience. When you look at a painting by Van Gogh, you see a picture of a landscape, maybe some people walking through it and stuff like that. And yet, in that, you can also sense his energy, who he is, who he was. You get there's this whole encapsulation of this person. So if I was to look at and analyze crop circles, I would try to look at him in terms of like, how do I go back to the creator from this, the same way I look at a painting.
And here's the second clip.
If these were messages coming from somewhere else, it's entirely appropriate that the thing would be witty, playful, geometrical, and staggeringly beautiful and inspiring. The systems of proportion used in all sacred art and architecture are very specific. They all embody a certain amount of geometry, and they all obey certain rules. There are rules which state that you have to balance line and curve in sacred art. We see it all over the place in church windows, Islamic patterns, all the rest of it. So the line elements of a design have to balance the curve elements of a design. Crop circles were obeying that rule. Another rule, you have to balance your light and your dark in any piece of good ancient sacred art. Again, crop circles were obeying that rule. The two-ness of it, the laid crop, the standing crop. Sacred art is supposed to be operating without ego. You don't sign, you don't have artists behind sacred art. The divine is supposed to be operating through sacred art. Again, crop circles were exactly following that rule. Another rule, your integrity of materials in sacred art. You shouldn't really be using anything that isn't directly from the earth. You want to stay green and clean and holy. Again, crop circles are obeying that rule. And then you've even got other rules, such as the temporary nature of quite a lot of sacred art, that it's often destroyed. After it's made, it's not supposed to be venerated too highly for too long, otherwise it becomes a sacred cow. And again, crop circles, they're being mowed down every year. Another good example of it. Crop circles are the finest example of modern innovative sacred art for our times. There's no competition. There's no competition. There's nothing happening in the visual arts or modern arts at any level, anywhere on the planet at the moment that begins to compare with it as an art phenomenon. And there is no artist, certainly, who could begin to compare with the artist who is behind the crop circle phenomenon in terms of design. They are very, 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 very good designers, and yet they don't hold their head up. So who are they? So what is it? So who's behind it? Why does it bear all the hallmarks of a mercurial intervention in some way, or even something else? And if it's the guys in the spaceships, I'd love to visit one of their chapels, because they sure do good windows.
So
anything to add to that?
I kind of want to reserve my sacred art for a little later.
Okay.
For a specific reason, but I'll talk a little bit about sacred art. I'm a big believer then in sacred art in general, and the reason why is that you look at lots of things in nature that actually are perfectly symmetrical. So if you look at, say, a snowflake under a microscope, you have a perfectly symmetrical, beautiful thing underneath a microscope. So, or a beehive. A beehive's another thing that's just, it's really very beautiful. And you think of such a simple being. I couldn't create something as beautiful as a beehive.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I'm not trying to be sappy here, trying to be like artistic.
Mm-hmm.
But if you